Hi, welcome to the Chad Bozarth Show. Thanks for listening. Natasha, it is so good to see you.
It's wonderful to see you too.
Thank you for joining me. So I want to start by asking you, I don't know if you've seen on the news, but we have some intense cold weather about to hit the United States. Now, I don't know how it is in other parts, but here in Dallas, we're expecting, I don't know, 2 to 5 inches. But I have seen some crazy pictures coming from
Uh-huh.
where you are in Russia. What kind of winter weather is normal for you?
Aha. Well, because Russia is such a huge territory, so it's less snow where I'm located, Moscow, but still, a couple of weeks ago we just had a lot of snow. And we expect next week for 2 days again, nonstop, 2 days snowing. Then in Kamchatka, which is next to Alaska, this is where, all the internet and all the news they show just the storms and up to the 10th floor of those buildings, apartment buildings, snow. Then we have churches in above the polar circle area. They just have a normal winter, which is, very cold, a lot of snow, and so it's nothing special for them. But for our territory, for the central Russia, it's kind of was, it was warmer, and then suddenly just several days it was snowing nonstop. So it
Wow.
was hard.
So,
Mhm.
so what was that like growing up in Russia? Did you grow up in the city or in the country?
Aha. My father was an officer in the Soviet army,
Mhm.
and it was a Soviet time. It was very, how do you say, propaganda everywhere, starting with the kindergarten, etc. And my father, he was an officer, a political officer, which meant that he was teaching ideology in the Soviet army. And so we were traveling every 2.5 years. We would move from one military base to another. So I was born in Belarus, which is a
Mhm.
separate country now, but at that time it was one of the republics, 15 republics of the Soviet Union. And then we would move all the way to the Far East, next to China, the Vladivostok and Ussurisk. And this is where I grew up. We moved to three different places. Like it's a military base in the middle of the forest, no conveniences, just you know, two stored homes. There are no conveniences inside. It's like toilet outside.
Mm.
So, but when you're a child, you just don't notice those things because
Mm.
it's. My parents were very good, how to say, very kind people. They loved each other. They loved me. And then I went to school in the Far East, but then we moved back to Belarus. It's always moving. In Belarus, we moved from one area to another. And then I graduated my high school already in Czechoslovakia because our
Mm.
troops, Soviet troops, were there. And they were in the Eastern Europe. The Soviet, they were occupied by Soviet Union. And so 3 years of my high school, I studied. It was 40 minutes from Prague. It was beautiful. It is a beautiful place. But we were kind of like elite because we lived outside the Soviet Union. But now, as I look back, I tell my friends, we were elite. I mean, everything military was elite, but it
Mm.
was like we were less poor than, than others. Ah,
Interesting. But
mhm.
in your mind, you were elite.
Well, I didn't think about it. It's just what they say. The system was still, you
Mm.
believed everything was propaganda.
Mm.
There were four channels on TV only, and they were all showing the same thing practically. They're just news, the same news. It's
Mm.
what you needed to hear. And now, as I look back, I just, it's just amazing. You know what amazes me? That I grew up absolutely atheist, and I didn't know God existed. My parents were atheists, and at school, in the kindergarten, I mean, you had to be a part of a communist, like Young Communist League, a pioneers organization. I mean, there should be you were so how to say, installed in that system since
Mm.
childhood. And so I believed everything they were teaching us, telling us about Lenin, that he was almost like God that we worshipped.
Wow.
But then when we moved to Eastern Europe, there were more freedom there. There was more freedom
Mm.
there. And so this is where, and then it was also, I think, um, um, I just say, in Russia, we have a saying, sunset of communism. Not the
Mm.
sunrise, but sunset. It was going down. And so my generation, we were very skeptical, sarcastic.
Mm.
We told jokes about Communist Party. We were making fun of the leaders of the Communist Party because they were all old, and
Mm.
they just, poverty in the stores. I mean, lines to buy meat or something. So the contrast with Eastern Europe, there was a contrast with the Czechoslovakia. But still, I was an atheist. So, as I look back, I think if you sincerely grow up all your life not knowing that there is God, but if you are sincerely start thinking about the meaning of life, I think you're kind of on the right track. But this is where God
Mm.
starts working with you and just guiding you to, I like how to say, to certain events where He will make sure that you will hear the truth, or you will see it, in the books or in the Bible, and then your heart just
Mm.
tells this is it. Because the first the first time, my first Bible was sent to me from Sacramento, California, from America.
So
And
what was
so,
that like when you grew up in that environment and then you you got a Bible? What was that moment like? What was your did you have preconceived ideas about what the Bible was, or can you what was that like?
well, it was when I was 29 years old already. I graduated from the linguistic university, taught at high school languages, then moved to kind of like a college, taught Spanish and English there, still atheist. And then before I got my Bible, I was invited by one of my colleagues at work to visit her in her apartment. And she was telling me her testimony. She
Mm.
grew up as atheist also, and then she got sick. She was married, she had two children, young, beautiful, wonderful family, loving husband, and then she had a brain tumor. And the Soviet medical system was so helpless. They didn't have enough equipment, just to
Mm.
help her. So she was just doomed just to wait for her death. And she had terrible headaches. So she invited me. So she told me her story, that
Mm.
she went to all the extrasensories, and nothing helped. And then the last person she called was her aunt. And her aunt was going to Pentecostal church. In the past, it was underground,
Mm.
but it was already the time when relative freedom came, because Gorbachev was the head of the Communist Party. And so the church was kind of above the ground already.
Mm.
So my friend, called her aunt and told her about her situation. And her aunt told her, "You need to come to church and
Mm.
you need to accept Jesus." And so shared the gospel with her. And so anyway, my friend went to the church, accepted Jesus. They prayed for her, and right there in the middle of that prayer, the miracle took place. God healed her. The tumor shrunk, the pain was gone, and so she was so happy. It was Sunday, so the next day she went to the doctor that kind of, they couldn't help her. And she said, "Look, you need to just see and examine me. Jesus healed me." And of course, doctor was an atheist also. And he said, "No, I don't think it was Jesus. It just, now sometimes things happen." And so that's why she decided to invite me to her apartment and share the gospel. And I thought that she's just out of her mind because there is no God. And so she was a young believer, so she couldn't answer some of my questions. And so she invited me a couple more times. And then I told her, I don't want to come anymore. Don't call me when I am ready. I will call you first. But she gave me this magazine, Christian magazine, printed in America. And
Mm.
somehow American, I think they were immigrants, Russian speaking immigrants who lived in Sacramento, California. And so they printed this magazine in Russian, and they were somehow smuggling or shipping them to the Soviet Union. And so she gave me this magazine. She said, "Well, at least take this and read it." And I took it because I've never had held any Christian literature in my whole life, 29 years, never, never. And so I took it, and on the way to my home in the bus, I read it from cover to cover because I've never read anything like that. So then at home, I would go back to the magazine and I would read it and reread it because, it's a different world. I mean, people who believe in God and the testimonies and the stories, they seemed so, kind of like it's their different world and they believe in, what they were writing about. And then at the end of the magazine, on the last page, there was a Lord's Prayer. And this is where I remembered my grandmother. She was not
Mm.
an atheist. I mean, she didn't profess her faith, but her father was the last Christian in our generation. He was sent to Siberia because he had a Bible under Stalin.
Wow.
And then
Wow.
his children, they never mentioned kind of about God. Sometimes my grandmother, when I was little and I was visiting her, she would tell Lord's Prayer,
Mm.
sometimes. And I didn't pay attention, to that because I thought, well, it's kind of like a fairy tale. But anyway, when I was reading this magazine and I read the Lord's Prayer, I remembered my grandmother's. And now, as I look back, I think of the importance of the seeds that we sow.
Mm.
Even if they don't make sense now, God works with seeds, and the
Mm.
seeds of truth have power. And this is where the power is. And it's just so important. I mean, we live in the age where everybody judges success on the harvest. But in fact, the success is about seeding largest, the biggest amount of hearts, because
Mm.
that's the most important thing. So anyway, and then a few days later, I decided to write a letter to the editor because I was so intrigued by the magazine. And so I thought, well, I'm going to ask him questions. It was very short letter. I introduced myself and then I asked questions that everybody asks. If God exists, then why these things and happen, etc. And I mailed it, and it was America, Sacramento, California. So I kind of doubted that letter even will cross the border. But then 2 months later, 2 months later, I got the little piece of paper from the post office that there is a package that's waiting for me in the post office. And I was going to my work, and I remember I stopped at the post office, and that was the parcel, a package from Sacramento, California. And I was so shocked. I mean, here, the Soviet Union, my father taught ideology that Americans are our ideological enemies. And here I am holding package from Sacramento, California on the bus stop waiting for my bus. And I open it, and the first thing I see was a little blue Bible. The first Bible in my life. I open it. I opened it, and the first, first verse, in the beginning, God created the heaven and earth. And I knew at that time I was already wondering about the asking questions. What is the meaning of life? Is it all? I mean, I just felt like I just hated mediocrity. I just didn't want to live like everybody else lived their life. I looked at my friends and I just didn't like the life they had. And so I read this verse. I knew in my heart that this is true. This is the truth. This is the truth. And now, as I look back, I think that God created people in a such way that you may be brainwashed for since you are born, but once if you're sincere about wondering what is the meaning of life, what is the truth, because communism was failing. Everything we built a bright future, it was not so bright at all. And so everybody was disappointed, especially the generation, my father, my parents, because they believed in everything. They were part of that system. But our generation, we were very skeptical, and it was such an important time. So when I read, I knew this is the truth. I was so excited because there was a Bible and there were another issue of the magazine, then some newspapers, Christian newspapers, some brochures that they put in the package. And when I came home, I read everything, everything. And I think this is how I was seeded with the right information. I think maybe 6 months later, they've been sending me every month, they've been sending me a new package with
Mm.
another issues of the magazine and newspapers and brochures, and I read everything. They've been so faithful. My father didn't like that. They didn't want me to keep even that literature at home because I guess it's his how he was raised. You don't it's just dangerous. But it was a different time already, different season in the history of the Soviet Union. And so I read everything, and then I received a letter from an American, and that was the last thing because I dreamed about here. I studied English, and I dreamed about being an interpreter. But
Mm.
there was no one to interpret for in the Soviet Union. And so I got the letter from an American because the editor of the magazine was Russian. I mean, very known person. He was persecuted in the Soviet Union and then they immigrated, etc. And he was very known in the Russian speaking community.
Wow.
So the letter from an American. And this American, he wrote to me that the one of the Sundays, he decided to visit this Russian speaking church, Russian church that is not far from where he lived. He came to the church, and before the service, he stood at the book stand, and there he met this man, Nikolai Vadnevsky. The Nikolai Vadnevsky was the editor of the magazine that I
Wow.
wrote letter to. Can you imagine? I mean, that's
Wow.
and so he said, I met him, and we talked about, and then church and God, and he suddenly pulled out of the pocket of his jacket your letter. My letter. Can you imagine?
Wow.
He didn't throw it
Wow.
away. He carried it and prayed.
Mm.
And he pulled out your letter and he said, and he gave it to me and he said, pray for her. She is an
Mm.
atheist. She doesn't believe that God exists. And so I
Wow.
want you to know that I am praying for you. God loves you. That's it. And that last sentence really was changed my life. I ran to the
Mm.
phone and called my friend, the one that was healed by Jesus and the one that gave me that first issue of the magazine. And
Mm.
so I called her and I told her, listen, I need to see you. I want to show you this letter. It's from an American. He's a Christian and he said that God loves me and he prays for me. And
Mm.
we met the next day. Next day was Sunday. She was going to church. And I said, can I go with you? Because I need to show you this letter. And so it was the day, the 13th of May, 1990.
Wow.
In the middle of the service, my eyes opened and spiritual eyes opened, and I suddenly knew in my heart God is real. He is
Mm,
real than anyone else. He always was next to me, and I ignored him. I didn't know him. I missed the most important thing in my life. Here I was considering myself an intelligent person, and I
mm,
smart, and I missed the most important thing. I
mm,
missed the reality of God. And so I was crying and I was kind of talking to God and telling, I'm sorry, I didn't know you existed. I'm sorry, if I known you existed, I have followed you. And here was an altar call. And I told my friend that I would like to go come up front and accept Jesus into my and pray. And so she took me up front, and the tradition was you kneel down, and then the deacon helped me, and he kind of led me in the prayer to accept Jesus. And
mm.
then when I got up, I was absolutely different person. That was a miracle of a new birth, and my life was divided in two parts. And before and after, I was absolutely new person. I ran home. I thought that my parents will be happy to hear about Jesus, and they were so scared that they didn't receive anything. I mean, from me, they were so scared for me, and it took some years. I think
Mm.
6 years later, an American pastor who came to my hometown and conducted evangelism campaign. He led my father to the Lord.
Wow.
Yeah, yes, and I led my mother to the Lord, and
Wow. That
so
is amazing, Natasha.
beautiful. Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
So your process, it was kind of a gradual thing, all of these seeds that were being planted and people praying for it. What would you say, we all encounter atheists in our life. Like what would you say to an atheist that may be listening now? Because I don't know, your testimony is so encouraging to me and what would you say to somebody who's just in that place, like, I don't believe in God, I'm
Mhm.
I'm a scientist, or these types of people, like what would you say?
I would say, just the most important thing is, I believe, not to, how to say, not to settle with what life offers you. Keep asking questions about
Mm,
the, meaning of life. And, you know, uh, I would, how to say, I would encourage Christians to just see those people, and
mm,
uh, for the atheist, just how to say, just keep asking questions, because I about the about God, about the meaning of life, because I believe this is how God would choose people even in the Bible. I mean, here an example of Abraham. I mean, here he was a Gentile. He was in Chaldean culture, idol worshiper. But I believe that God saw his heart. I believe that the fact that he was looking in the stars, looking at the sand, once you start looking to the creation of God, I mean, even to the nature, even if you're a scientist, I mean, that's a wonderful path to find out about some things, many things that cannot be explained by science. And that, you know, that's such an opportunity to believe and just admit that there could be something more than just what you can prove. And I think to be open and just to keep asking questions, and it just, I think we are created in a such way that it's something inside of us wants to go beyond what we see.
mm,
It's like we have a lady in the up north. She's belongs to the ethnic group of Nenets. A lot of idol worship, shamanism,
mm,
and so she never heard about Jesus. They would be in tundra, deer breeding, moving from one place to another in this hut, in this tent made of the, deer skins, etc. Her father, her mother, brother, and her. And I asked her once, you never heard the gospel, you never heard about God, Jesus, but if you ever asked question about, is there a creator? And she said that when she was a teenager, or I think maybe younger than a teenager, in summer when they would bring their herds of deers to uh, the sea, the northern sea, she said I would come out in the evening and I would look at the sea and look at the stars and the deers, and I would think, there is such a beautiful creation. There should be a creator. Can you imagine? And I thought, here a girl grew up in shamanism, absolutely in witchcraft. I grew up in atheism, but witchcraft is a belief. They had idols,
Mm,
etc. But there is something that God put in us that seeks after Him, and
mm,
I think it's important to be open and think beyond, what you see or touch
mm,
or. So I would encourage to keep asking questions and keep thinking.
mm,
And because God, this is how God, how to say, He can intrigue us and, how to say, draw us to Himself.
mm. So what I have two more questions. I know time is limited. I'm struggling because I have so much I want to ask you. Thank you
Uh-huh.
so much for sharing this. I don't want to get political, but I do want to ask you something. It seems like in the United States that in some circles there seems to be kind of an affinity for communism.
Uh-huh.
And I don't think they would use the word communism. They would maybe put it, but in my perspective, it's inching towards communism.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you see that from your perspective happening in the States?
Mhm.
Well, what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think that would be?
Well,
Why do you think young people coming out of the university would have kind of a romantic view of communism?
because it takes several generations to forget to forget how bad it was under communism. But I really believe that, first of all, I know a little bit. I try to study the history of America. First of all, I believe that the communism will not be adopted by America because of the foundation of your nation. It's Christian. It's very unique and it's powerful. I believe the influence of America in the world is because of its history, foundation. The foundation determines everything. Once we start right, it doesn't matter how we may wander through the whole journey, we will end up right. Foundation determines. In Russia, we don't have that. Our
Mm,
history was always the history of oppression, of dictatorial government, etc. So I believe that maybe in Russia we are laying a different foundation now.
mm,
But in America, I believe that it's a very strategic time for the church today. The reason why there could be more atheists and people who are interested in communism, it's because it's because church all over the world, I mean globally, the history of the church, it goes like in waves. The church forgets its primary mission. It's all about, you see, when I say that, it's almost like cliche, preaching the gospel. Now,
mm,
in a Christian mind, oh, well, we preach the gospel. But today, probably more than ever before in the churches, a lot of people who go to church, but it doesn't mean anything. They doesn't mean they came to the Lord and they begin to follow Him, because real evangelism, it's when you not just pray the prayer, when you chose to follow Jesus. It's all about, this is the start, the beginning. And I believe if a Christian who came to the Lord and follows him, like Jesus said, picking up the cross, which means, thank God I don't have to dream, set goals of life, what am I and what should I be. God told me already what am I and what I'm supposed to do with my life. And I believe if a Christian is really came to the Lord and chose to follow him, you live always knowing that you are on a mission everywhere you go. You pay attention at people. Then, the second thing I believe, when we talk about when we say the gospel, Christians, they may think different thing what the gospel is. I really believe the gospel is about Jesus in the center and not come to our church. Then you won't go to hell. No, going to church and coming to Jesus and following him sometimes is not the same. When I came to the Lord, then the church began to make sense for me because I
Mm,
fell in love with Jesus. I fell in love. He became the love of my life. Still is the love of my life, the purpose of my life. I think when your life is transformed, when you are born again, it's absolutely different life. You see, there is religion. Religion, it's like with the miracle of Lazarus. Religion tried to heal old, sick Lazarus. They don't let him die. Jesus said, no, the sick old Lazarus need to die. New one need to come out of the grave. I believe that's the difference between religious system, and Christianity, where everything starts with a miracle of new birth. Because once you experience that, you cannot be the same. You cannot live the life the same. Then that what makes difference in the nation.
mm,
That what how to say you don't have to have an evangelist who will go somewhere and have evangelistic campaigns on behalf of the church. No, everyone in the church becomes an evangelist and on a mission, and that influences the society. And atheism doesn't have a chance
mm,
when the church is on a mission.
mm,
So I don't believe that America will ever become atheistic because of its
mm,
history, because of its foundation, and now God is shaking the church so that it would go back to its purpose, because our only purpose on the earth is to do our part in salvation. Jesus did his part, we do our part. Preach the gospel, make disciples.
mm. That's so good. Thank you, Natasha. Well, let me ask you this as we wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Um, you've talked about sowing seeds. You've talked about a new foundation for Russia. What are you doing? Can you share a little bit about what you're doing?
Uh-huh.
You're playing a big role in that. So
Praise God.
share with
In
us what you're
fact,
doing.
yeah, in fact, my friend, he lives in Georgia, in the country of Georgia, also powerful minister. He said, Natasha, and he has all the friends, pastors in all over Russia also. He says that we laugh because he says that the real mission work is done by you and your organization. No, none of the guys that started with the missions in the 90s, they don't do it anymore. But we laugh. I believe that we live in the time where, God is going to shake the church, and He is shaking the, so that the churches start doing, the mission work. So, what we do is we preach the gospel in the villages, in the rural areas, and among ethnic groups that live in the Far East, in the above the polar circle area. And the churches that we start in the villages, they are not big, but I really believe now why the early apostolic church, they would, uh, the apostles would preach the gospel and thousands would get saved, but then they immediately would go into home groups, because real effective discipleship is possible only in small settings, because it's all about relationship, it's all about personal. In fact, I believe personal evangelism is the most effective evangelism. And I really believe we shouldn't divide evangelism and discipleship. They go hand in hand. They shouldn't be separation. And discipleship, it's not the Bible school, it's relationship. It's about Jesus. It's growing in the knowledge of God. And uh, we start churches in the villages. It's easy in the village to build a church building if necessary. Most of the churches start in people's homes, and there are different regions in Russia. You know, there are regions that historically are, well, Muslim. That's, you know, and one strategy there. There are regions that are historically atheistics.
Mm.
There are regions that are historically more influence of Russian Orthodox Church. And by the way, well, I cannot say that in Russia, you know, but I can say on your podcast, the only persecutions, and we had some persecutions in the villages. The only persecutions we had were only from Russian Orthodox Church, not from the government. The government doesn't
Really?
care. If we are not a threat to their power,
Mm.
then the only persecution we had from the Russian Orthodox, I don't know, you know,
Mm.
it's a, you know, the only persecutions Jesus had from the religious system. You know, politicians could kind of, you know, if you are not threat to my power, like, you know, Pontius Pilate asked him, "Are
Yeah.
you the king?" "No, I'm not. You know, I have disciples. I don't have army. No problem." But the religious guys, they wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is nothing new. But you know, when I go to the villages and I spend time with the people there, they live very poor. I mean, our villages are poor. They don't know how poor they are, but they are so generous in their poverty. This is where I'm happy because they are real. They'll tell you all their life. It's just amazing how beautiful are people. To me, real Russia are those village people. They're the real treasures.
Mm.
Now, with all the political situation, you know, with war and everything, God is speaking to us about the importance of us, how to say, to bring healing because,
Mm.
oh, well, anyway, because the guys will come back, you know, when the war will be over, the guys will come back broken because they don't know why they are there, you know,
Mm.
and they, well, anyway, this is a very dangerous subject. So
Mm.
anyway, but what I want to say is that uh, you know, the prophecy says that God says that I want to give you hidden in the darkness treasures that are hidden in the darkness. When I go to the villages and I see the conditions of their life, but I see those beautiful people who are so they are so open for the gospel. They are so giving and loving in the midst of, you know, so much lack. Um,
Mm.
you know, sometimes in the like in the central Russia, we would help people to buy trucks of truckloads of wood to heat their homes because 80% of the Russian villages, 80% don't have gas
Mm.
to heat their home. Here we are gas empire. So you know, we help them to buy, you know, those woods, or we just buy for their children some school supplies to go to school, and it's just so it's beautiful. And people accept Jesus. We talk about Jesus. We give them Bibles, and they gather. You know, we start churches there, and we bring them libraries. We call them gospel libraries. The books by T.L. Osborne, Daisy Osborne, LaDonna Osborne, because we are connected to them. Bibles and just beautiful.
Mm.
Our missionaries, some of our missionaries in early 2000, we were providing vans and snowmobiles. Now, with all these changes in economy, the prices are up, and we have a work also in Georgia, in the country of Georgia. So we help missionaries there also, and so
Mm.
anyway, it's beautiful. So we are doing the God's work in the rural areas of Russia and some former Soviet Union republics.
Mm. Wow. Natasha,
Mhm.
thank you so much for sharing your story and thank you for your ministry. And I pray that the seeds that you have sown and that you're sowing will bear much fruit for future generations. So thank you for spending time with me.
Thank you. God bless you.